If you've ever wondered about what kind of society where the underground black market thrives best, then the answer will probably be the Soviet Union. The underground market was an integral part of daily life for people living in socialist countries. In fact, it is what enables the Soviet Union to last for as long as 70 years, and the underground economy in these countries are sometimes larger than the real economy in capitalist countries. It is estimated that the annual Soviet black market transactions amounts to $145 billion, with around 83% of people using the black market regularly to buy daily necessities and other goods, and around 20 million people were working either full-time or part-time to provide goods and services in the black market. But why did the Soviet black market get so big in the first place? Well, in theory, the Soviet economy was controlled by the state. Goods were allocated by a central planner who decides pretty much everything. If you manage a factory in the Soviet Union, for example, the central planners get to decide how much you should produce within a given year and how many raw materials, machines, and workers you get in order to produce those goods. The purpose of this was to use resources more effectively and efficiently, all decided by the central planners in Moscow. This also extends to the consumption side as well, albeit less directly. If you are a worker living in the Soviet Union, you have the freedom to spend your hard-earned wages on basically anything that you want. But the catch was that the central planners already decided which items would be available for you to buy and at what prices. And as a worker, you could choose where you work, but factors like how many hours you work per week and how much money you're making weren't decided by negotiation between you and the company. All of them were decided by the central planners in Moscow. By the way, working at more than one job was illegal. But all of this was true only in theory. In practice, a person or an entity managing the whole economy is just impossible. It's simply too complex. For example, factory managers couldn't be sure that they would get the raw materials and machines that the central planners promised them. Yet they have to fulfill the production quota ordered by the state. So they often turn to a black market middleman who search for these supplies by any means necessary. They exchange favors, bartered goods, or simply paid bribes to secure supplies. On the consumption side, the country was oftentimes plagued with shortages of food, housing, consumer goods, energy, and other daily necessities. So, like the factory managers, consumers often turned to the black market in order to buy daily necessities or foreign goods that weren't available in state stores. The same pattern could be seen in the labor market. Managers sometimes adjusted the employees' rigid wage system by giving incentives to top performers. And they often turn a blind eye when workers steal or use valuable items from the workplace. I will reveal why so many Soviet workers steal from their workplace later in the video. The ban on workers working multiple jobs was also ignored by many Soviets. In fact, after 1970, as the Soviet economy stagnated and the black market grew rapidly, the official state sector jobs were mostly becoming a convenient cover for the people's real source of livelihood, a second informal job. This results in people evaluating state sector jobs based on the black market opportunities that the job can offer. A job might have a lower expected salary, for example, but people may choose that job over the higher paying alternatives since it gives them the opportunity to make more money in the black market. That opportunity may come from less working hours, which gave people more time to focus on their other job. Or it may come in the form of resources or connections, which they can leverage to make money. So, we can see that the Soviet centralized planning system is the basic cause of the thriving underground economy. As the state was unable to fulfill its promises to factory managers and provide basic necessities for the people, the Soviet citizens filled the gap with an extensive underground network of transactions, creating a thriving underground economy that operates outside the law. This second economy actually helped the Soviet central planners, as it covered inefficiencies within the system, although they also helped to cause the Soviet downfall. Now that we know the reasons why the black market exists and thrives in the Soviet Union, I want to examine the types of activities that happened in the Soviet underground economy, so that we can learn the various ways in which the Soviet people made money in the black market and understand how an underground economy functioned in general. These types of activities are private businesses, consumer services, speculation, and middlemen. There are of course many more ways of making money in the Soviet black market, but these four were the most common and highlight best on how the underground economy provided goods and services for the Soviet people. So, the first is private businesses. Basically, this was just a business engaged in free market trade with the objective of making money. We wouldn't call this black market activity in most countries, but this is the Soviet Union we're talking about. These businesses range from factories, grocery stores, shops, farms, etc. Most of these enterprises appear as socialists, but beneath that cover, their real function was to make private profits. For example, a state factory will keep an account with the state bank, keep books, pay taxes, and fulfill the production quota. But they also sell their products in the black market, often at an inflated price. The Soviet agricultural black market is a prime example of this. The limited supply, low quality, and poor diversity of state agricultural goods meant a thriving black market. It involved collective farms and state farm workers who were assigned a plot of land. After giving the state its share, these farmers took what is grown in their private plots and sold it to a farmer's market. It was estimated that these small plot farmers produce around 25 to 30% of all food sold in the Soviet Union, with some saying that it was much higher. So the agricultural black market plays an important role in feeding the Soviet population. Another example of this is flea markets that trade in second-hand goods or foreign goods that were stolen, smuggled from overseas, or somehow diverted, finding their way to these flea markets. Now, for people who travel or work abroad, smuggling goods to the Soviet Union can be very profitable, as goods from other countries were in high demand and people were willing to pay a premium for them. These items were mostly Western items like radios, televisions, cassette recorders, trendy clothes such as blue jeans, and computers. The other source of black market goods is just plain stealing. Usually, this was done by people who have access to those goods, aka the workers. For example, a worker who managed the warehouse has the opportunity to steal some goods and sold them in the black market. Or a truck driver that was tasked to deliver crates of food could steal one or two for himself. Besides stealing, there were tricks that could be used to deceive authorities. For example, placing water next to sugar will cause the sugar to absorb the water and weigh more. Or selling frozen meat and butter will significantly increase their weight because of the ice. These lost goods were then diverted to the black market where they could be sold. Beyond markets for agriculture and industrial goods, there's also a flourishing market in illegal money exchange system. You see, foreign tourists and business people who required Soviet rubles for domestic use must purchase them from government banks, which often inflate the value of the ruble because of their limited reserves. So the black market provides more rubles for a US dollar or a pound, providing a good alternative for foreigners. The second black market activity is in services. For decades, freelancers were providing services that were in short supply. These services include car repairs, house painting, house building, plumbing, etc. During the day, these freelance workers were employed in their full-time state jobs as construction workers, car mechanics, or plumbers. But at night, they provided their services to the Soviet citizens. For example, you could hire construction workers to undertake a black market project that the state did not permit, for the right amount of cash, of course. This also extends to workers taking a cut for themselves while working their full-time jobs. For example, if auto repairs cost $10 according to the state, a car mechanic can charge $12 instead and have the extra $2 for himself. This is called under-the-table markups. The third black market activity is speculation. Basically, this is just someone buying goods and then selling them later at a higher price, just like how we often do with real estate. Again, this isn't classified as a black market activity in most countries, but this is the Soviet Union. Now, among the Soviet black market activities, authorities have attacked speculation the most. One of Lenin's first acts after the Russian Revolution in 1918 was titled "On the Fight Against Speculation." This makes sense since it is a direct threat to the central planning system that the Soviet adopts. How speculation works was that speculators bought goods, usually from state stores, and then resell them on the black market at a higher price. Large-scale speculators always keep in contact with several workers in state trade who knows best the situation regarding supply and demand, so that the speculator could know what goods will be profitable if it's resold. There are of course many unique ways on how people could make money in the black market. For example, a Soviet tabloid in 1977 published an article about how a 19-year-old who works as a lab assistant managed to earn money with speculation. He buys a Soviet-made t-shirt for 3 rubles, had an artist friend to put a logo of a well-known West German firm on it, and sold it at 10 to 15 rubles. The fourth black market activity is middlemen, and just like the name implies, it's an activity that helps arrange dealings between 2 or more entities. For example, if you're a customer searching for rare black market goods, then you could use the service of a middleman who has connection in state retail stores or flea markets. This method was common for Soviet consumers who want to buy expensive consumer items like colored televisions and freezers. But it also applies to real estate, with the middleman acting the role of a real estate broker. Another example is a middleman who helps organizations to find necessary supplies and market their goods. As I mentioned before, it was common for factory managers to use middlemen to find supplies that were promised but not delivered by the state. And vice versa, raw material producers like collective farms also use middlemen to sell raw materials to factories. So, what were the effects of the underground market on the Soviet Union? Well, like I said before, it helps to provide goods and services that the state cannot provide, satisfying consumer demands. But there were other benefits as well. In certain areas, it helped to ease political tensions. You see, the Soviet Union was divided into lots of ethnic groups. Many ethnic minorities like the Uzbeks, who's predominantly Muslims for example, got most of their income from the black market. And they usually have much higher incomes than many ethnic Russians. So it did help to ease tensions between ethnic groups. But in the end, the black market doesn't solve the main problem with the Soviet economic system, which was the inability or unwillingness to satisfy consumer needs and wants. And the thriving underground economy was an embarrassing evidence pointing out that the people themselves don't have faith in the Soviet economic system. Now, the rise and fall of the Soviet Union is another fascinating topic. If you want to know about its underlying reasons, feel free to click and watch this video. This is Doverhill, and see you next time.